You and I are obligated to people we have never met. I'm looking at Romans 1:13-15. I want to talk about this. I don't want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that I often planned to come and see you, but was prevented until now, in order that I might have a fruitful ministry among you, just as I have had among the rest of the Gentiles. See that word right there? I'm obligated both to Greeks, barbarians, wise, the foolish. He means everybody. So, here's why I'm eager to preach the gospel to you. Why? Well, because of that. That opening sentence, there's a point Paul wants to make. I don't want you to be unaware of something. You could come to church today and go home and be unaware of something. And Paul says, I don't want that to happen. So, in other words, there could very easily, in my life, be ignorance about what he's trying to say. He's going to stress something that he says is crucially important, but very easily missed. So don't be unaware of this, Don. Here's the contemporary issue. Everybody talks about our giving to missions and people that are coming out of the church going into missions. It's good. What's the fuel for that? In a tough economy, people feeling the pinch when they go to the grocery store, mounting expenses. What does it take to keep a church like Cedarview globally ambitious? Is it, well, Murray comes and he puts those slides up and he talks about those projects and he hits our hearts with just the right project and it speaks to me. Is it managing our church expenses so we have extra money and we can do something outside the walls of our church? Is it keeping pace with the latest social media techniques so we have something slick? That's the issue this text is addressing. Paul describes a compulsion. It's right there. A driving force behind global reach. He's going to tell the people in Rome that he may have been delayed in coming to see them, but there's no way he's not going to get there. In fact, he wants them to know, even though he's been delayed, he's still eager to get to them. And now, on to this point that he doesn't want them unaware of in 13. He's not eager to reach the Romans because they're just such wonderful people, or they would be easy to reach. He's not going because he's fulfilling a denomination's missionary assignment. He completed a course, he filled out the papers. No. He says there's this heavier weight behind his mission. He says, don't be unaware of it. He says he's actually got an obligation. That's the word he very carefully chooses, an obligation. Like your mortgage payment. If you have that's an obligation. It's not up to you to decide whether you want to pay it this month or not because it's an obligation. He has this actual debt to be paid to these unreached people. And he feels this accountability. Now, starting to wrap up. How did Paul become this owing person? Where did this debt, this obligation, where did it come from? Well, it came from being a receiver of God's redemptive grace. A number of people talked about God's grace. But the thing is, the reception of grace creates gospel obligation. Paul says it's a real obligation, not just some religious concept. To embrace the gospel is to owe the gospel. That's what Paul says. I don't want you to be unaware of this. You might think it's up to you. So this idea is both glorious and it's frightening. It's frightening because this is how I can recognize how deeply I've received divine grace. It's a way of measuring. That's what Paul says I don't want anyone to be unaware of. I sin if I ignore this obligation. Something remains unpaid if I miss this. That's why Paul presses the weight of this divinely owed debt as deeply into my easily self-absorbed heart as he possibly can. So hear the Holy Spirit. Reception creates debt. Or to put it another way, and I hope you remember this sentence, saved people this side of heaven owe the gospel to lost people this side of hell. It's frightening. But it is also a glorious debt. It has a wonderful goal in constant view. It's that the name of the Son may be praised among all the nations. Everybody was talking about verses they love. I like this one. Through whom we have received grace and apostleship to bring about the obedience of faith for the sake of his name among all the nations. One more thing. I wasn't going to do this. I love this verse. When I think about my giving, my obligation, Paul says something that's almost too good to believe. If we hadn't read this 1,000 times, it would hit us harder. Knowing that whatever good each one does, slave or free, he means everybody, whatever good each one does, say that with me, he will receive this back from the Lord. I don't know what that means. Does that mean here we are coming up to the close of this service and I'm thinking about what I'd like to do for the Lord? Does it mean the Lord goes, oh, yeah, Don and Renee. Everything that we do, we receive back. I don't know how to read that text except God keeps track of every good thing you do. He keeps track. Don't want you to be unaware, Paul says. It's an obligation, but it's a glorious one because God keeps track.